Elite athletes and high performers don't necessarily work harder than you, but they probably think better than you. I spent the last 5 years building a leading sport and performance psychology consultancy, and we work with over 2,500 athletes in over 80 different sports. We've worked with national defense, leading musicians, and we've even worked with high performing founders and entrepreneurs. And what's really interesting is while the performance domain seems entirely separate, they share very similar patterns. And these patterns are less to do with talent, luck, and something that they inherit, and they're more to do with mental patterns in terms of the perceptions, style, and quality of their thinking. And these 8 tips that I'm going to share with you today are probably the exact opposite of what you would think. So first of all is confidence. Everyone recognizes confidence has been really important to performance, and probably every athlete in the world wishes they felt a bit more confident. But the best athletes in the world are less reliant and less reactive when it comes to their confidence. So the biggest mistake that you can make for confidence is basing it off short-term results, basing your confidence purely off how you performed on Saturday versus an aggregate sum of how you performed over the last month or how you've performed over the last 3 months. When you base your confidence off short-term results, it's inherently going to be unstable. An unstable confidence creates inconsistent performances. The best athletes in the world know this, and they manipulate the evidence that they focus on. When things are going well, they zoom in and they base it off recent events. But when things aren't going so well, they zoom out and they base it off a wider time period. While this may not always seem rational, and you might say that you can't have it both ways, well, the best athletes in the world manipulate the evidence they focus on, and they change the story they tell themselves to create a more desirable outcome. And the other thing with confidence is that they don't wait to feel a certain way before they can act in a certain way. Athletes separate their behavior from their emotions and feelings to create more consistent performances. And this is a superpower. Stop waiting for the evidence. Stop waiting for that belief to come first. That belief will come as you create that evidence for yourself, but you need to act like it first. Everyone says this is fake it till you make it, but be it to become it is a more accurate observation. Next up is motivation. Very similar to confidence, there's this illusion that we assume that elite athletes wake up and they're just way more motivated than us. They wake up and they want to work really hard. They're always up for it. They're always in a good mood. They always want to push themselves and train hard. And this isn't necessarily true again. This is an assumption based off observed behavior. Motivation is temporary. Motivation fluctuates. It changes every hour, let alone every day or every week. So if you're solely reliant on motivation, then you're always going to be inconsistent. Again, elite athletes know this, and they've trained themselves to detach their mood, emotion, and energy from their behavior. And for me, I think this is a superpower. You want your behaviors to be controlled and consistent rather than reactive based off temporary emotions. Next up is pressure. The best athletes in the world make pressure work for them rather than against them. They use it to help them perform better rather than it hindering their performance. And this ultimately comes down to perception. So a really important place to start here is that you only get nervous about something when you care. So nerves aren't the enemy, nerves are just a signal, and how you then interpret that signal dictates whether your brain and body work for you or against you. When you perceive the situation as a threat, you slip into what's called a threat state in the body. So 2 different stress axes that we can slip into here. One's a challenge state, the other one's a threat state. The default response is probably going to be negative. So we probably slip into what's called a threat state, where we essentially lose intelligence, we make poorer decisions, we don't transport oxygen as well, and we fatigue a lot quicker. Just by changing your perception of that situation to a challenge, seeing it as excitement rather than nerves, seeing it as an opportunity rather than a threat, just by spending 5, 10, 15 seconds changing the way you frame that situation changes your psychophysiological response, which is how your brain and body work for you rather than against you. When we're in that challenge state, instead of it releasing cortisol, which constricts the blood vessels, it releases adrenaline, which vasodilates the blood vessels, which means it increases oxygen transportation, thus making us endure longer, making us more physically capable. And we also make better decisions and process emotions when we're better in this state. So just by changing your perception of pressure, whether it works for you or against you, literally changes how your brain and body work for or against you. And thus, if you perceive pressure to be helpful, and if you become someone who starts to love pressure, then pressure will work for you. Something that elite athletes really excel at is that they know how to get out of their own way to allow flow states to occur. You see, when we're under pressure, everything inside us tells us to do more, to think more, to process more, to do everything differently. But the best athletes know that they need to keep things simple and stick with their processes as well. See, pressure makes us want to overcomplicate. When we overcomplicate, we overthink, and when we overthink, we underperform. If you want to get into a flow state, it's less about thinking and it's more about doing. See, classically with flow states, everyone used to think there would be this overactivation of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's involved in decision making and complex reasoning. But actually what happens is the exact opposite, something called transient hypofrontality, which basically means temporary underactivity in the prefrontal cortex. More specifically, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain which is involved in doubt. You see, the more we overthink things, the more we doubt, the more we compare, the less we're in the present moment and the less we are able to perform. So the best athletes know how to get out of their own way, less thinking and more doing. Number 5, intentions. What you think about before you perform and the conditions that you set yourself influence your subsequent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So the big mistake that amateur athletes make is they place a rigid set of conditions and outcomes that they need to live by and abide by to perform well. So these preconditions or these unconscious rules that they might not necessarily say out loud to themselves, but that dominates their style of thinking and their behavior, involve these 5 words that I call psychological swear words. Need, must, have to, should, can't. So I need to play well today. This is a must win. I have to score. I can't make a mistake. I have to get off to a good start. When we place these conditions on performance, they don't create freedom, they create pressure. And pressure translates into tension, avoidance, and negative thinking. Now, what's really important and what you want to shift towards is to have intentions. So an intention is a present moment controllable thing that you can actively do rather than measure yourself against. So the big difference here is in the present moment rather than a future condition based around perfection that you have to live up to. Now, the irony here is by reducing the focus on the outcome and putting it all into the process, you actually increase the quality of the outcome. This is a common thing when it comes to sports psychology. Focus on the process, not the outcome, but it's so true. Let go of those rigid conditions and those unconscious rules and focus more on intentions, those present controllable things that are going to move the needle the most. Elite athletes spend more time in discomfort than your average person because they know this is going to create learning and growth faster than anything else. Now, getting outside of your comfort zone and stepping headfirst into your fear zone is really, really important for 2 reasons. So first of all is for disproving your known fears. 98% of what you worry about never comes true. But if you never test it out and actively step headfirst into that fear zone, you never give yourself the chance to realize most of what you worry about never comes true. If I sat here and told you that I'm afraid of stepping outside because I think I'm going to get struck by lightning, you would probably laugh at me. And yes, it is ridiculous, but the more I acted in line with that belief, the more real it becomes. Avoidance reinforces that belief because I never give the chance to disprove it. Now, the second reason why this is so important is for dealing with unknown fears. If we don't constantly step outside our comfort zone, if we don't expose ourselves to discomfort, we don't give ourselves the chance to build up the mental skills, the resources, the coping mechanisms, the resilience to deal with small micro discomfort. So when that bigger change comes in the future, inevitably, and it always will, when those unknown fears come around the corner, we haven't built up the skills to deal with it. Now, think of this a little bit like a vaccination. Okay, a vaccination works. It exposes the body to a small amount of the disease, so we build up the immunity to fight it again in the future. Well, the same thing happens when it comes to your fears as well. If you can deliberately expose yourself to discomfort, you want to stretch yourself but not snap. It wants to be uncomfortable but not overwhelming. If you can deliberately expose yourself to discomfort, you're going to build up that mental immunity, the coping mechanisms, and the resilience to fight unknown, unpredictable fears when they inevitably come around the corner. When it comes to dealing with negative thoughts, elite athletes respond in the exact opposite way to what their logical mind is telling them to do. Now, when the untrained brain encounters a negative thought, it defaults to 2 different options, which are the worst things you can do, but the most logical things you can do. And this is the thing that trips most people up. So the first thing that you would do, if you wanted to get rid of a negative thought, you would suppress it. So you would try to get rid of it. Now, the problem with this is conscious suppression creates a rebound effect. When you try to get rid of negative thoughts, they just bounce back up a lot louder and stronger than before. And I'm going to prove this to you in 5 seconds why this doesn't work. Do everything in your power to not think about a pink elephant. So you can't think about a pink elephant. Stop thinking about a pink elephant. You're obviously thinking about a pink elephant. When you try to consciously suppress something, it bounces back up to the surface a lot louder and stronger than before. It's a bit like having a ball in a swimming pool. When you try and push it down, it doesn't stay down. It bounces back up and it sometimes smacks you in the face. And for me, this is the perfect metaphor for why suppressing negative thoughts doesn't work. And then the second option, or the second default that we slip into, is arguing or rationalizing our negative thoughts. Now, I'll put an asterisk by this, as rationalization can work when there's no emotion involved. But when it comes to high performance under pressure, there's obviously emotion involved and it doesn't work. It just creates this argument inside of your head. It creates this angel devil type scenario when you're trying to argue your way out of these negative thoughts and trying to find evidence for the contrary. Now, why this is so ineffective is that 80% of our thoughts are negative. This creates a 4 versus 1 scenario. And not only are your negative thoughts outnumbered by a ratio of 4 to 1, but something called negativity bias means that we listen to, we believe, and we act in line and pay more attention and weight to negative thoughts over positive ones. If you're driving down a motorway, you see a car crash on one side, you see flowers on the other, you look at the car crash, partially because you're nosy, but because of negativity bias means we're drawn towards danger. Our attention heightens whenever a negative thought or scenario comes about. So the ultimate place to get to here is a place of acceptance. Now, I need to be really clear with this. Acceptance doesn't mean that your thoughts are true. It doesn't mean that you're going to be stuck overthinking forever. But acceptance allows the negative thought to pass on so you can get to a place of detachment quicker than before. The ultimate goal here is you want to accept things as quickly as possible, as the sooner you accept something, the quicker you can move on. Elite athletes are more present. They spend more time in the present moment and they're able to reset and get back there a lot quicker than amateur athletes. One of the biggest mistakes that I see amateur athletes making is that they spend their attention on psychological time. They spend too much of their attention on the past or the future, living in memory or anticipation, basically spending their time in their imagination. Now, the best case scenario of this is distraction. At the best case, you're distracted, but realistically, what this often causes is overthinking, choking, and freezing. And these don't take place in the present moment. These take place as a result of you thinking about things or exaggerating what's happened in the past or predicting or getting anxious about the future. So the important takeaway here is to be really deliberate with your attention. Treat it like the finite resource that it is. If you treated your attention like a currency and you were really deliberate with where you spent it, I really believe this frame would help athletes spend less time in their head and more time in the moment. So the simple goal here, you want to spend as much of your time as possible in the present moment, and you also want to increase your speed of resetting and getting back to the present moment as well. Most of the tips that we've gone through today are all about being more present, not creating more pressure, not spending too much time in the future or the past. The ultimate goal of this is that elite athletes are better able to get out of their head and into the moment. I don't think the best in the world are more mentally tough. I think they're more mentally skilled. They've deliberately trained their brain to improve the quality of their thinking, to improve their perceptions, and to spend more time in the present moment. The people who figure this out, whether you're an athlete or an entrepreneur, are ultimately the ones who achieve the extraordinary outcomes. If these tips have helped and you want to start to think like one of the best in the world, then you can apply below to work with either myself or one of my team. Or if you just want to follow along for some free source, then please do like and subscribe. I'm new to this YouTube game and I'm really keen to deliver some value. And the thing that I want to leave you on is to take these tips and implement them right away. Don't just nod and agree and say you'll try to think like this. You need to take action to create change immediately. So you need to implement these right away. Be lucky.